days, November 73. The nation's story came of age, of vision grew, now we see. Oh, what a story, the nation's story.
In 1960, I finished my school at Harrison College, and I was looking for a job, but for some unknown reason, none of the people that I had applied to, the companies, I got no response from nobody, and all my school friends getting responses, and I couldn't understand what was happening. And there I was walking come down Broad Street. I used to live in Gabby's Hamilton at the time, also known as Chapman Lane. And when I got by the advocate who was then on Broad Street, Carol Moore, who had been one of my buddies in school, he was outside with two of the other people who worked there, linemen talking. So he stopped and he asked me, so what are you gonna do? You got a job? I said, no, I can't. I have not received any responses from anybody else, for anybody. So you can go upstairs in the afternoon and ask for a man named Douglas Smith. Because apparently the advocate had just been bought over by the Mirror Group, I think it was, of England, and they had sent down this guy named Douglas Smith. He was a New Zealander to run things. And I had an interview, he interviewed me, and he asked me what qualifications I coming from school, and by the time he told him I had 7 O levels and 2 A levels, he said, you'll hear from me. No, he didn't ask me another question. He said, you'll hear from me. I left school the day after that. That was the last day of school. And when I got home, my sister, she told me a letter is here for me from the advocate. This day after, when I opened it, I expected to hear, well, sorry, no, you can't employ it. But the letter was informing me that they wanted to employ me and that I should report to work the very next day. So the very next day I wore a shirt from my father and I put on a pants and a tie and I went to work. I went to the Nation, and that same day I went to the advocate, and that very same day, by coincidence, Fred Gollop was one of 4 people, including me, who were going in for the first time. So when I got in there, it was me, Fred, Harold, and Carol Moore working in the advocate. Little did I know that several years later, the 4 of us would be involved in this thing called the Nation. But in 1973, I was doing a lot of things to the advocate, and I was perhaps at that time, this is exaggeration, I was about the most popular, best known reporter in Barbados at the time. And I was coming, I knew of the plans and the meetings that people were having about starting this thing at the second newspaper, and the third then, because I had the Daily News. So this new newspaper, and I knew who was involved, but I was not invited because I understood that they didn't want to put my job in jeopardy. And I was doing police reports. Police was one of my beats. And I was coming from Central Police Station one evening, and I met Fred Gollop. He had left the advocate before then, and he had gone off and studied law, and he was practicing, and his office was on James Street. And I met him at the corner of James Street, coming from the Central Police, and he stopped me and told me the fellas were ready to do this thing, and he wanted to know if I would be willing to join the staff. Because with my popularity and the fact that everybody knew me, it would be a plus for a new publication. So I tell him, man, no problem. He's not, man, it's serious, you know. I'm not making sport. You want to know if you would join us. I said, Fred, you'll hear from me. And I left talking to him at corner James Street. We went to the advocate. We went on, in those days was typewriters. went on my typewriter and wrote my resignation and handed it in. And then they came back, went by him and tell me I've resigned, so I'm ready. So he asked me if I had a few dollars because they were trying to raise some money, right, to buy a press. And I had the grand sum of $2,000 on the bank because at that time I had been working at the Advocate from 1971 when it started at $200 or $250 to 1973. I was then earning the grand sum of $600 a month. But I was involved in a lot of entertainment promotions, etc. So I was able to make a few extra dollars. So I went and I drew off $1,000 and I went and gave him. And within time, the premises at St. Mary's Road, the back of St. Mary's Church, was ready, and we were ready to start to launch the newspaper. The editorial staff comprised of me as features editor, Charles Harding as news editor, and Carol Moore as the editor. And we were the three editors and all the reporters put together. All right? I was features editor and all the feature reporters. Charles was news editor and all the news reporters. And the only person that was in the editorial at that time would have been Robin Jarvis, who was employed as proofreader and whatever to do with pages. So we started, and eventually we got the first publication ready. Unfortunately, we couldn't find anybody in Barbados to print it, and Fred was able to make contact with, I think it was a company called Sign Creators in Trinidad, who agreed to print it. And so we got the first publication out. And it was such a hit. It was like as if somebody with the status of a Bob Marley or a Starboy that had come to Barbados. People just were rushing to get this thing in their hands. This new look. Because with new look, it was just a small newspaper on like the broadsheet, right, that the Advocate was, and it was attractive. It had nice photographs. It had a lot of nice things in it that were more appealing to the average man in the streets than the Advocate was doing, because the Advocate was still, as we were saying, Barbados, bougie at the time. So it took off, and every week we would put this thing together, and it would rush down to Trinidad and come back, and it evolved from there. After a while, we were able to add one or two staff members to supplement the three of us. Unfortunately, Carol had a problem, and he eventually, within about a year and a half, he resigned and he left. And Harold, who had been one of the initial people who conceptualized the idea and who had met in order to bring it to fruition, but he was still working then in his father's business, and he decided to take over from Carol, and he became the editor. We brought in a few other people. I remember Tim Slinger. He was my personal friend, so I encouraged him to come over. And we brought in a handful of other people. And we moved from being, eventually, we were able to move from being just a weekend publication to being a weekend and a midweek publication. And from midweek, eventually we moved in to, from midweek to a Sunday publication. So then we had 3 publications, and eventually we went daily.
How did your assignments differ than after you went to this new paper in the early days from what you were doing at the Advocate?
The assignments didn't differ except for the fact that I was freer to do what I call down to earth assignments. Like one of the first big stories we had, I got a call from a friend of my father's in St. Lucie telling me that there's this guy who lives in a cave, right, in St. Lucie. And that was something that if I was at the Advocate, they want a story of a man living in a cave. But that was a big hit without really putting the man in the position where people laugh at him, but where people must empathize with him. And eventually people came forward and brought him out of the cave, give him a house or whatever. So it was things like that. And then one day, this guy called and said he was calling from Dodds. Dodds at the time was, I think Slinger would have mentioned it, Dodds was then the home of the juvenile children, the girls and boys. And it was in the prison it is now. And this guy said that he was at God Dodds, but the conditions in which those kids had to live was deplorable. And he said that their needs exposing. He wants to know if we could find a way to come up there and get in there and see the conditions for myself. And I said, well, nobody's going to let me in. I have to know, because I was doing a lot of exposing at the time in different areas that had been left unnoticed by the traditional media at the time. And he says, he tell me Saturday night, can you come up to Dodds about midnight, right? And he told me where to park and wait. So Slinger was my second man at the time. I had slinging training, and we had been good friends even before that. So we worked as a team. I said, Slinger, we got a serious assignment this Saturday night. And he said, why is we going into Dodds? He said, man, what? So we get Dodds. So he said, you come out, I can pick you up. So we go up to Dodds, and I parked with the man told me to park. And then I saw a light, flashlight by a gate. And I see someone waving, and we went in. And he took us upstairs and wherever. And the kids, these children there, especially the boys, sleeping on the floor, right? Sleeping on the playing floor, or they had a sheet or whatever. But it was he described it as deplorable. It was very deplorable. And we went back and we published a story, and it just blew the roof of the top of the place. And we got cursed for it. I was threatened by the then whoever was minister responsible that he would get me locked up. And me and Slinger, you would get us locked up for trespassing in government property and all that. But I guess at the time the demand or the respect for the nation was so much that to do that, or even to try to do it, he would have lost his ministry or whatever. And then just like that, people start calling us and identifying areas which had been neglected, and in villages and wherever. And even in business, because one of the biggest stories that we had, and the one that really cemented my name in the nation, was when we had what was then the oil crisis, I think of 1973 as well, or 1974, right? When the price of oil was going up on the international market. And for some unknown reason, Barbados was minister responsible for energy, and they made the decision that to save on the cost, that they would shut down half of Barbados one night, no electricity, and then the next night there'd be electricity in that half, and the other half would be whatever the price of gas and everything went up, and you had vehicles in lines for miles trying to get a gallon or 2 gallons of gas. I used to live in Country Road at the time, a road off Country Road. So to get to work, I had to transport on my own. I would walk down Country Road and down Robert Street and down to the nation. And when I was walking down Country Road, where there's these big bonds, sugar bonds, where the sugar behind the factories, where we had factories, and all the sugar used to come down and be stored there into Country Road in these bonds, and then the trucks would take them from there when they're ready, when the ships were in, to take them down to the port. And I was walking coming down, and they had their own little gas pump to service the trucks, right? And I noticed this big, long American car taking fuel at one of these pumps. So from passing there, I knew one or two first, you just shout one other thing. So I went to one of the guys who work and they said, whose car is that? He said, my own other car? I said, no, whose car is it? He said, man, there's the minister. Which minister? He said, the minister take care. I said, we don't need it. All of us come here and get gas.
The privilege part?
Yeah, the privilege. And I wrote this thing. I said, this story that was headline, the privilege pump. And it was the biggest story that was ever hit Barbados. Because everybody, when you're in a time of austerity in terms of getting fuel, in terms of electricity, in terms of even getting water. And there's a story with a minister's car, not even a little mini English car, but a big American car that was probably worth 1,000 gallons, and that's how this pump being filled up. And that story just took Barbados by storm. And I mean, my name was very big already in Barbados as a journalist, even from back in the Advocate days. And then when that came out, my popularity just went sky high. I went to South Africa first in 1983-84 with what was then termed the rebel West Indies cricketers. And then in 1994, after apartheid had been disbanded, I went back then with the first official West Indies tour. Not to cover the cricket this time, but to compare what living conditions were now for South Africans as opposed to when I had first went there 10 years ago before, with the apartheid system and black people being ostracized. And this picture was taken by my good friend Sir Wesley Hall, who was at that point in time the Minister of Sport, and he went down as well with the cricketers' first official team. And he told me, Al, wherever you go, you are my liaison officer. He didn't have anybody with him. And we met with Prime Minister, we met with everybody. And then the first, Mandela had been released from prison about 2 years. And then this first match at a place called Wanderers in Johannesburg. And it was arranged for Mandela to meet the two teams, the West Indies and the South Africans. And after that, there was a reception in the VIP area for Mandela to meet the guests. And when he came in, the guests, there was about 200 of us in there, and it was divided, and there was a path down the middle. And he came down and he spoke on either side to about 3 or 4 people, and then he looked up, and this shocked everybody. He says, wait, is that the great West Hall I'm seeing? And he forgot everybody and came down to West. And he says, let's sit down and talk. And he sat down and West said, by the way, how do you know about me? Right? And he told us that he had followed the fortunes of West Indies cricket because it gave him a lot of inspiration. A black team from the Caribbean right at a time when black people in South Africa had no rights, and this black team was dominating the world, beating the English, beating the Australians, beating the New Zealanders, everybody, because West Indies then was the force in the cricketing world. And he sat down and spoke to us, so ignored everybody. And I interviewed him the same time. I perhaps was the first non-South African journalist to have an interview with him. And then I took a picture of him and Wes, and then I gave Wes the camera, and Wes took this of me and Mandela.